Today I would like to talk to you on the subject of reflections of a leader. I'd like to talk to you about, as a leader, looking back on my life, things that I reflect on, things that I find that I want to embrace about leadership, lessons that I've learned, and through the Enjoy Life Club tape. This is a tape club that I have done now for 15 years. I can remember in 1987 when I turned 40, I did a tape entitled, I'm 40 and Counting. And what I did in that tape is I talked about how that at the age of 40, there were certain things I felt as a leader you kind of wanted to have under your belt as you kind of launched for your second half, okay? So that was in 1987. And when I turned 50 in 1997, I sat down and I talked about reflections of a leader. I'm 50 and reflecting. And I want to read one paragraph out of my I'm 50 and Reflecting tape that I did 3 years ago. 10 years ago, my subject for Enjoy Life Club subscribers was, I'm 40 and counting. Today, 10 years later, I'm willing to look back, not because my race has been run, but because I want to help others run successfully. Yesterday, my success in running life's race was at the top of my list. Today, I feel like Paul, who said, keep track of those you see running this same course, headed for the same goal. I guess what I'm saying to you is the difference between, for me, 40 and 53 is that at 40, I really wanted to personally win. And God has helped me, and I've had some wins, I've had some losses. We all have, haven't we? But as I now am 53, and as I reflect back, trying to win myself has been kind of replaced with trying to help other people win and adding value to their life. So I would like in this lesson, if I could, I would like to reflect some, and I'd like to kind of get personal with you, and I'd like to hopefully come home and connect with you on some things I've learned, that I know, and that I embrace about leadership. 3 thoughts here under the results of reflection time. In other words, when we reflect, there are some things that happen. And number one, for example, when we reflect, it allows us to have second thoughts first. And that's refreshing. You know, just to be able to have the second thoughts first and say, oh my goodness, I've never been able to do that. Number 2, over time, the important and the unimportant separate. That's a fact. What comes together and won't separate when you're young, the older you become, the more you reflect, the more it separates for you. And number 3, and it's all written in there for you, only time will allow us to journey from the know-how of leadership to the know-why of leadership. In fact, I want to share with you the 5 stages as I have tried to grow and develop as a leader, the 5 stages of leadership knowledge for me. First of all, the know-how to lead. That's what happens as I began to grow as a young leader. This deals with learning and growth. Early on in our stages of leadership development, we began to learn to know how to lead, and we began to learn and grow. Number 2, the second stage is to know who to lead. And this deals with community and teamwork. Pretty soon you begin to know who you want to link up with to develop as community and team. Stage number 3, know where to lead. And this deals, I believe, with calling and vision. Now those 3 stages, the know how, the know who, and the know where, I think those in my life have unfolded before the age of 40. The last 2 stages, they've come on along a lot later. Stage number 4 is know when to lead. I think this takes a lot more timing because this takes a lot more time because this deals with timing and with effectiveness. As you mature, the know when to lead is really important. And then I think that the stage that I've gone through in the last 3 or 4 years that has really helped crystallize things for me is stage 5, know why you lead. And this deals, I think, with motives and with security. And so that little bit of reflection with you for a couple of minutes, I would like now to give you 4 or 5 reflections as a leader. Things that I look back at, that I can with integrity look you in the eye today and say to you, you can go to the bank on this leadership thought. Reflection number 1, people become like their leader. That's a fact. The people you lead become like you. I teach what I know, but I reproduce what I am. Let me explain. When I talk about the fact that people become like their leader, if you lead an organization, if you lead a department, whatever you lead, I'm not sure what you lead, but whatever you lead, here's what I want you to understand. The longer you lead your people, the more they become like you. In fact, I can still remember as a young leader in the 1970s, going to a conference in Canton, Ohio, and having this leadership teacher say something that just shook, I think, the whole foundation of the people attending the conference, because he looked at all these leaders and he said this to me. He said, if you have been the leader of your organization for 3 years or longer, every problem in that organization is your problem. I mean, it just settled like it just settled here. Now, you have to understand, I'd only been a leader of my organization at that time for 2 years. I mean, I'm taking notes, and when he says that, I'm saying, that is a true thought. That is a wonderful thought. Now, when I became the leader in my 3rd year, I thought, whoa, every problem in the organization is my problem. But here's what I know about reflecting. After all these years of teaching leadership and teaching leaders and being a leader, the people become like the leader. In 1981, when I went to my church in San Diego, California, I followed the founding pastor. He'd been there for 27 years. He was a great musician, had an Irish tenor voice. And when I went to the church, you know what amazed me? The church was filled with musicians. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. Everybody played an instrument. Everybody sang. And I mean, I was just blown away. Now, why was the church filled with musicians? Was that luck? Luck had nothing to do with it. It was the fact that their leader was a musician. And so therefore, musicians beget musicians. Now, when I came, musicians weren't drawn to me. You understand? In fact, they're kind of repelled by me, especially if they had a little bit of moodiness in them. I mean, I'm not into letting you kind of get a little bit of a mood trip. I mean, I'm just slap you upside the head. In the name of the Lord, of course, you understand. And say, come on, straighten up here. You know what I mean? Let's go. So when I was there for 14 years, after my 14 years of leadership, the church wasn't filled with musicians. It was filled with leaders, because I'm a leader. Like begets like. It's called the law of magnetism. It's one of the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. And the law of magnetism, in your notes, the law of magnetism basically says this: we attract who we are, not who we want. In other words, we attract people like us. We don't attract normally or necessarily the people we like. We attract the people that are like us. So, because we attract people like us as leaders, because the people that we lead have a tendency to become like us, there are 3 statements I want to give you. Number 1, it will take a conscious effort to appreciate and attract people who are different than the leadership. In other words, if you and I are going to attract people that complement us and that are different than us, it's going to take a tremendous effort for us to not only to attract them, but to even appreciate them. I can still remember, it was a revelation for me. This would have been now, 15 to 18 years ago. I can still remember reading a book by Florence Littauer called Personality Plus, where she talked about the 4 temperaments. And I'm reading this book, and all of a sudden I realized that not everybody not only is not like me, but it is legitimate for somebody to be not like me. In fact, they can go to heaven and not be like me. Now, I'm convinced they won't go as quickly, nor they have as nice a place. But it was huge for me the day that I realized that different people, that diversity is good, not bad. Now, when I talk about the fact that it's going to take a very conscious effort for you to not only appreciate but attract people, here's what I'm saying. You will naturally attract people like you. Again, birds of a feather flock together. So you have to, on purpose, reach out to people that are different than you to allow them to complement your giftedness. And this is especially true when you develop your inner circle, the people that are going to be closest to you. They need to be different. And the best way I can explain this is, temperament-wise, I am choleric sanguine. That's my temperament. The people around me, in other words, I'm a person, I'm kind of like a choleric, kind of a bossy person, but I love to party. I love to have fun. You've probably already gathered that, haven't you, huh? So basically, I like to tell you what to do, but we'll party while I tell you what to do. But most of my inner circle people, almost all of them, I mean almost 100% of them, do not have my temperament. Most of them are melancholy. I've got a lot of flags around me. I've got a lot of stability. I've got a lot of people that can have details and close the door. Now, all I'm saying is I value them tremendously because they balance me. They complement me. And when you attract people like you, you have to make a conscious effort to allow other people to come into your life that are different than you, and that's okay. That's what makes a good leadership team. Statement number 2. The people tend to have the same strengths and weaknesses of the leadership. That's a fact. So when you attract people around you that are like you, the good news is that you have the same strengths. The bad news is you have the same weaknesses. And so therefore what happens is if the people around you are like you, there are open, huge blind spots in your company and organization that are just going to give you all kind of trouble because all the people you have, they kind of think alike, they're on the same philosophical bed, and there's not going to be the balance that you want. Number 3, the third statement is this, that the leadership of the organization must change before the people. If you want to change the organization, change the leader. We've talked enough about that. Oh, by the way, let me just say one thing about change. Let me stop here just a second, and then I'll go on, okay? Let me just say one thing about change. I used to think that leaders kind of were excited about change and followers resisted change. Now, I used to think that. I don't think that anymore. In fact, what I've come to the conclusion is that leaders, I think, resist change as much as followers, unless it's their idea. In fact, I'm starting to come to a conclusion that it's highly possible that leaders resist change more than followers because they have their turf. Are you with me? And if they think anybody's going to do something that's going to get in their turf, their domain, interrupt their plans for their people, there's a tendency for them to become highly defensive and against someone else's desire to change. That's very important for you to understand. Now, who you are is who you attract. And I am convinced that we attract people like ourselves. One last thought before I take you to reflection number 2. This is probably the greatest motivational principle that I've ever learned in my life, but it fits here so well, let me give it to you. Remember this, people do what people see. And because of that, this reflection of people becoming like the leader just increases. Okay, that's one reflection I want you to have. A second reflection I want you to have as a leader as I look back at my leadership is that leading others takes courage. It takes a lot of courage to lead others. In fact, in your notes, knowing the right decision is easy. Making the right decision is hard. How many of you have known what you should do? Let's just stop here for a moment and get a show of hands on this. How many of you have known what you should do, but because it took courage to do what you should do, you delayed the decision of what you should do? At least once today. Now we all have. I have. We all have. You know. And now in the Christian circles, what we do when we don't want to make the hard decision is we just say, "Well, I'm praying about it." Oh, we get so spiritual, don't we, huh? Yeah, I'm praying about that. Now, what I'm talking about here is, this is very true, and this was very difficult for me. Making hard decisions was very, very difficult for me because I grew up in a home of my family, very loving, unconditional love to us. So I grew up in a home that was very peaceful. So peace was something that I cherished. Can you imagine when I became a leader? How naive, a better word, how stupid. Because I had this congregation, I want everybody to be happy, and I want everybody to get along, and I want everybody to kind of join hands, close their eyes, and hum along and sing Kumbaya, my Lord. Come on. And obviously, when you start leading people, and you just find out that people are tough to lead, and they're difficult, and some of them are just downright nasty. And you've got to, as a leader, begin to make hard decisions. You see, I learned a long time ago, as leaders, we love the perks of leadership, but we don't want to pay the price. And as leaders, one of the prices that we pay as a leader is these tough, hard decisions. I remember, again, when I went to my church in San Diego, California, the pastor, who was a marvelous man, marvelous person, but he'd been there for 27 years. And just like if you live in a house for 27 years, after a while, you just accumulate a lot of stuff. Are you with me? I mean, you just need to move every few years to kind of clean out the attic or have a fire or something. You know what I'm saying? And I can still remember as I went to that church, he looked at me, and bless his heart, he was tired, and he should be tired. He founded the church. He's a great man. But I can still remember looking at me and saying, "John, there are some tough decisions you have to make." And he said, "I'm tired and I'm worn out." And he gave me a list of all the tough decisions I had to make. And I had to let staff members go. I mean, I had to relocate the church. I mean, it was a big list. And I realized even as a young leader going to San Diego, that the only way that I was going to succeed is by learning how to make the tough, hard decisions. It's kind of like this. I think this is the best way to explain it. Here's the way this works. Most of the decisions a leader has to make are not that difficult. In fact, the average freshman in high school that is reasonably intelligent can make most of the decisions a leader has to make. 95% of them, if you're just an average good student in freshman in high school, you could make 95% of the leadership decisions that you need to make in an organization. But it's that last 5%. That's what they pay you for. Because those are the tough decisions. I can still remember going through those difficult decisions I had to make in my church in San Diego. And they were. If I had 2 hours, I would tell you stories you would not believe. But in 1995, when I resigned the church, one of the commitments I made was I was going to make the tough decisions before the next pastor came. And I mean, I went in and I weighed in and I made some real tough decisions. And with great integrity, when he came, I said, "I just want you to understand something. You see this list here? These are all tough decisions, and I made them. Now, you're on a honeymoon stretch right now. Enjoy, because in a little while, you're going to have to make some tough decisions that are going to pop up, because that's the way leadership works. Leadership's difficult. I was talking to a pastor the other day who he was a little bit complaining because they had to raise some money for a building program, debt retirement, and he was complaining, and he said to me, "Well," to be honest with you, he was a little whiny. And he said, "Well, John," he said, I don't think the people are ready." And I don't know what he expected me to do, whether he wanted me to kiss his owie or sit down, and I don't understand the process. Well, I don't think the people are ready. And I looked at him and I said, "Of course they're not ready. That's your job. You're the leader. Hello? Anybody home?" That's what leaders do. In fact, I said, let me put it this way. If the people were ready, they wouldn't need you. If you're going to lead, just trust me on this, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Now, let me just give you quickly 6 things, lessons I've learned in making the tough decisions. Number 1, a leader is responsible to place the interest of the organization first. Very simply stated, let me explain this. I, as a leader, have to place the interest of my organization above my own personal interest. That's very important. Number 2, each courageous call required much time, energy, and prayer. That's a fact. You don't make a tough call flippantly. You don't just get out one day and say, oh, I got a real tough call. I don't know, should I relocate the organization or not relocate the organization? Well, let me see. Let me get a coin. Heads, we relocate. Tails, we stay. Life is not that way. I mean, when you make a tough call, you're going to have to take a lot of time. It's going to require a lot of energy. Oh, I don't even have time to tell you the story, so I won't tell you the story, but I wish I could have time to tell you the story. When I went to my second church at the age of 25 and had an incompetent secretary. Incompetent. She couldn't spell. She couldn't file. She forgot things. She didn't answer the phone right. She couldn't organize. Other than that, really no problem. I'm 25. She's been secretary for 26 years. In other words, before I was, she was. Oh. I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to go there talking about having to let her go. It took me 3 years to prepare files and the whole process to get the whole deal ready to let her go. When I tell people they want to be leaders, I always want to stop and say, time out. Are you sure? Do you know what you're getting into? The third thought about making the tough calls is that each courageous call demanded risk. I've never made a courageous call that I didn't have to risk something. I know a lot of people say, I don't mind making tough calls as long as there's no risk involved. Hello? What have you been smoking? They're all risk. If it's a tough call, it's a risk. Don't worry about that. Get out on the limb. Get out. Go ahead. Get out there on the limb. Get out. That's where the fruit is. Quit hugging the tree trunk. Singing Kumbaya. Waiting for the fruit to fall. Hello. Each courageous call demands risk. Number 4, each courageous call was questioned and criticized. I have never made a tough call where everybody stood and gave me a standing ovation. The reason they're tough is there's a lot of people that don't like what you're saying. Hello? You're going to be criticized. In fact, again, just in reflection, folks, I have made tough calls that still haven't turned out right. Are you all right out there? I was at a leadership conference recently and I heard a leader say, if you make the tough call, if it's the right tough call, it will eventually turn out right. And I wanted to stand up and say, I give you an A for effort, but you just flunked leadership. Because I want to tell you something. There are tough calls that you will make that are right. And they'll never turn out good for you. Just trust me. I live with some of them. I've had to let very close friends go, and they'll never understand. They never will understand. It's not a lack of explanation. It's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of trying. It's just the fact that when you're a leader, you're going to make some tough calls, and I do believe that most tough calls will turn out good for you. Now, let me tell you something. Tough calls will always turn out right for the organization, but they won't necessarily always turn out right for you. It's part of the process. Number 5, Each courageous call cost me greatly. I always paid for the courageous call that I made. You always give up some change. Are you with me? Trust me on this. If it didn't cost you anything, it wasn't a tough call. And lastly, each courageous call cost me greatly. What I'm saying is that every time I made a tough call, I've lost some change in my pocket. And again, I could go through a whole list of the cost that is involved, but just trust me on this. When you make a tough call, there's a cost involved. But here's what's really wonderful. Number 6, each courageous call lifted me to a higher level. In fact, the thing that I want to make sure that I get to you before I get to reflection number 3, because it's so important, is this. When you have a tough call, gang, here's the way this works. You don't want to make the tough call. Humanly, it's tough to make. I understand all that, but here's what I want you to understand about tough calls. When you make the tough call, tough calls equal a breakthrough. The greatest breakthroughs that you'll have individually, the greatest breakthroughs that you'll have as an organization, the greatest breakthroughs that you'll have in your leadership is when you make some of the toughest calls in your life and then watch how that tough call paid off. So every time you have a tough call and you don't want to make it, just say, oh, I got to get through it. I don't want to get through it, but I got to get through it because if I can get through it, on the other end is a breakthrough for me and for the organization.